Hello. Are students in Tennessee using litter boxes? We will discuss. Welcome to the Forge and Bill podcast, where we embrace uncomfortable conversations about culture and politics to sharpen ourselves for the race set before us. My name is Connor. I am host of this podcast. Joining us to discuss today is our guest, Representative Ryan Williams. Ryan, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hey, guys, thanks for having me on again. I'm Ryan Williams, the state representative for the 42nd District, married for 25 years to my lovely wife, Abby, who's originally from Cookeville. Have two children, adult children. And my full-time job, I'm in the construction business. And so I build commercial facilities, industrial facilities all around the state. And so I'm a commission-only sales guy, so that's what allows me to do, with the blessing of my employer, to be a part-time legislator. And so that's what I do.
Excellent. And joining us as always is our co-host, Zach Hall.
Zach Hall is my name. Singer-songwriter is the game. Guitar player extraordinaire as well. Plastic bag expert. Zach Hall Music is the place to find me on the interhighways. Got a new album coming out October the 14th in the year of our Lord 2022. It's called The Way We Were. Super excited for you all to hear it. Can you dig it?
Awesome. And back again by and as always, Michael Aper.
Hello. My name is Michael Aper. I'm a God-fearing seminarian that wants to challenge worldly culture with biblical truth. I'm a simple man.
Awesome. And as always, if you would like to support this show, go to forgeandanvil.locals.com. Again, that is forgeandanvil.locals.com. We appreciate your support. So let's dive straight into our story. So, Tennessee lawmaker calls claims of students being allowed to use litter box a growing crisis. This is from the Tennessee conservative news outlet. A hearing of a Tennessee legislature committee has surpassed thousands of views online, where two state lawmakers report that their constituents say that there are children in Tennessee identifying as furries being allowed to use the restroom in litter boxes at school. Representative Mary Littleton of the Charter School Commission asked, "I just have one quick question. Do charter schools allow furries to come as furries to class, which is children identifying as cats or dogs?" It goes on to say, Senator Janice Bowling followed the question with more concerns after the question was answered that they do not allow that. Quote, "Unfortunately, I'm hearing this in my rural districts where maybe schools are not fully disclosing that they are allowing children who identify as snakes, cats, whatever. They are providing litter boxes," Bowling said. Quote, "So I thank you, Rep. Littleton, for addressing this growing crisis." Researchers who have focused on studying the furry fandom say these rumors have been occurring over the past decade, but there has been an increase in the spread this past year. Gentlemen, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's strange. Connor, you and I knew somebody that once used a litter box, allegedly. I don't know if you remember that. I'm not going to say their name, but I'm hoping just me saying that jogs your memory. So, I mean, later on in that article, it does say that they weren't able to like pin down whether or not this was actually happening. I kind of hope it's not. But yeah, I think there are two of the most misunderstood minorities in America, at least, are furries, and then followed very closely by the American teenager. It's strange, right? It's not. I think that there's just a misunderstanding a lot of the times when people look at furries, just because it's so out there of a subculture. But really, it's just it serves as an avatar. You're furry for who you are. A lot of these people, it's just it's a means of escape, or at least that's how I got introduced to it many years ago. So I know things have changed. So as a way of actually identifying and carrying yourself out in the world, that would be news to me. But yeah, I hope there's not kids using the litter box. I'm hoping that it's just a rumor.
I think it's an important distinction that Zach mentioned, is that it's not an identity as the animal in and of itself, traditionally what the whole furry thing is about. It's a it's like an alternate identity with the avatar, almost like a weird spiritual thing. It's because I tried to do some reading about this because, good Lord, I don't know what's wrong with people. But, you know, it makes sense. What kid doesn't want to be their cat and the dog when they're playing at home? And when adults take that too far and let it become a social construct where people are dressing weirdly and making it sexualized and fetishizing this whole furry thing, then we end up with questions about kids who identify as animals, whether they should be validated in that, which of course is ridiculous. The furries in and of itself is a fantasy based on an avatar to experience some alternate reality, but that's just it, an alternate reality. And when children are going to a place of education, they're experiencing the reality of education. So the fact that this can even be questioned is absurd and obscene. I'm curious to hear Representative Williams' opinion on this.
Well, I hate to tell you, it is definitely an issue. I do think that one of my first thoughts when I heard this for the first time is obviously the question of the day is where are all the adults in the world today? I mean, really, do they exist in the world today? There were many times where my parents, would kind of, as we say, jerk a knot in your tail or discipline you and say, you've lost your mind. What is going on here? This is not how we act or behave. And this identity crisis, as we said before, is just parents want their kids to be happy and at the expense of all normal boundaries. There are no boundaries. And so it is pretty frustrating that this takes up or occupies the discussion really somewhere. I can tell you that I read a little bit about the allegations, Tennessee Conservative, and what they were saying. Of course, every person has to be able to, to generate looks or likes on their pages. Senator Bowling, this fantastic lady, served with Mary Littleton for 8 or 10 years. She's a fantastic member. There is no greater advocate for children in all the state than Mary Littleton. All of our human trafficking laws regarding kids that have been passed in the last 5 or 6 years are her work. I mean, she is at the front of this. And so if somebody was going to hear about this kind of thing first, it's probably going to be Mary Littleton. I think in the article and in the follow-up, it said they weren't able to substantiate any of these claims in the senator's district or in Mary's district. But I can tell you what I know. And what I know is there have been parents in Putnam County and in Jackson County, Tennessee, who have picked up the phone and called school board members or principals, and in a limited number, but still picked up the phone and said, will you be providing litter boxes in the bathrooms? And to the school board member's credit, she said, absolutely not. And so that's kind of where we are. But just like in every other thing in the world today, boundaries are being just completely trampled on in all ideas. There's nothing off limits, really. There's not. I mean, these ideas are crazy. I had a friend say, hell's empty the other day. He said, hell's empty because all the demons are here. I mean, it's just amazing because the whole world has lost its mind. And quite frankly, is in some instances we're encouraging it, which just absolutely is unfathomable to me, which is why I circle back to say, where are the adults really? Where are the parents? Where are the parents? Where are the rational, truth-seeking disciplinarians in the world today. They are very few and far between. And if you had one as a parent, pick up the phone and call them and tell them thanks, because
Yeah,
they are unheard of today.
absolutely. Yeah, and there's a lot of crazy things going on in Tennessee right now. And you mentioned, where are the parents and boundaries? And another story that that I keep seeing a lot of, kind of a different but similar nature in regards to, they both relate in their lack of boundaries and lack of parental uh, fulfillment of duties, which is a lot of these drag shows that we've been seeing going on in Tennessee as well. Now the three of us guys have previously discussed some drag shows and kind of what some of our thoughts are on whether that should be allowed or not. But I am curious what kind of things you're hearing from your constituents, Representative Williams, and if you've kind of noticed this rising trend. I've noticed in Tennessee alone, there's been several instances. There's been an all ages drag show at Tennessee Tech. There's been several in Chattanooga recently. There was a canceled one over in Memphis. So I'm just curious what the word from your constituents has been on this.
Well, I think, and much like the gender dysphoria discussion that we had previously, I think, adults can do whatever they want to do. I think anytime you bring children into an environment such as those drag shows, and parents are exhorting kids to hand dollar bills to people who are doing some form of undress in a show is not okay. I mean, that's just the bottom line for me. Most of my constituents are frustrated that this even exists in our community. I think most are even more angry that somebody would put their children in this situation. I did a lot of research about this. The event that happened at Tennessee Tech, I was able to listen to a podcast that drag queen did after the fact. The truth of the matter is, he even said in his own words, I was really uncomfortable with those kids being there. I was abused and exploited sexually as a child, and put a child in that. I would never want to put my own children in that deal. Even he knew, as a participant in the drag show, that it was wrong. Do you understand what I'm saying? This is not us saying it's wrong. It's he was saying it was wrong. He was uncomfortable. They shouldn't have done it. And shame on the parents for sending their kids there. The big challenge is, if they're consenting adults and they want to exercise their right to do this in the privacy of their own home or in a closed event, that's fine. But in this instance, to use it as a fundraiser for off-campus events is not right, and to bring minors onto the campus to do that, I think Dr. Oldham is to be commended. I think his handling of it was spot on. I do think that the court of public opinion is on his side, the majority of them. There are always going to be people that are frustrated and angry about this, but quite frankly, these are the same people whose parents were AWOL when they were younger. And so I do think it's a little bit frustrating there. And the truth is, if we don't get a hold on this pretty soon from a legal perspective, then it's going to be the normal across the state. But they were Memphis, Chattanooga, Jamestown. There was one in Jamestown, Tennessee. Here, they've been going on for years here. We did have an issue with them in our public libraries, and we were able to intervene there and make some changes so that they don't have them there anymore, because they try to do it here in Putnam County. The fact is that the current statute, I met with their district attorney and their sheriff and Child Protective Services to see what actions there are. I can't communicate a whole lot about the Child Protective Services component, but I do think there are some things that we can change legally as it relates to exploitation laws for minors. And I intend on carrying a bill to do just that. This is not okay. I mean, the images, as bad as they were out of Tech, the ones in Chattanooga were
Much worse.
Just unbelievable, really. If it weren't there for all to see, you couldn't have made it up. And so I think that's one of the things that you're going to see. I think the problem we're getting and the benefit to where we're getting, I think the majority of the people are just fed up, and they're just, frustrated, and I think they want to see these kinds of changes for the good of the community in our state.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I pose a question to Representative Williams?
Yeah.
You mentioned that the legislation needs to take place and be established in order to affect the norms, and whether events like this, or even whether it be furries having litter boxes in schools, or sexual transition situations like we discussed last time, or drag shows. My question for you is, will the legislation affect the cultural drive enough to prevent that from happening if the families and if the parents are permissive of these things? Will the legislation actually affect the parents' perspective on these?
The answer to the question is no. I think, one of the things that I've learned in doing this is you can't, and those who want to do these things are quick to say this. They're quick to say you can't legislate morality, and they're exactly right. And they use that as a reason for me not to legislate at least some boundaries or good guidelines that are societal norms that we wouldn't have to do previously. But the only way to really change that is to change the community and the people in which you live in. And that's one person at a time, communicating with one person at a time, building relationships, going, taking cookies to your neighbor, find out what's happening to them, like the church used to be. If you look at I was in Jonesboro, Tennessee, the oldest city in the state of Tennessee. If you haven't been there, you should go there. My wife and I, some of our greatest Tennesseans, all three presidents had visited there. It was an unbelievable place. It's probably 3 acres in size, the whole downtown area, 3 acres in size, 4 churches. And the whole community was built around the church. What we've done now is we've thrown the church out of community, but we did it ourselves. We quit. The church quit being a community. We built these edifices to ourselves, and then we don't invite anybody in, and we don't go out and communicate with anyone. But the only way it's really going to change, the only way is you'll see a reversion back to the way it was, is just for a moral awakening. And that moral awakening can't happen until we have a reconciliatory moment where we have a people, as not as an entirety, you'll never get that, but you'll have a people who has a reviving moment where there's this real act of contrition and a repentance to go the other way. There's just, until that happens, this is all just whitewash fencing. It's not really going to effectuate a whole lot. But for what I'm called to do and where I'm called to serve, I have to be obedient to do that thing, because it's the least I can do. But is there a magic pill? The only magic pill is the love of Christ in the community. That's it. And we just haven't been good as the body of Christ about doing that for 50 years. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that in terms of the church definitely needs to step up, and we need to get back to some of those principles of, a community built around the church. Now, the only thing that I think I would take slight issue with, and it's not necessarily that I fully disagree, it's that I'm still slightly weighing a better way of saying you can't legislate morality. Because I think to a degree you can encourage good behavior, of course, which oftentimes can yield to positive change. Now, of course, that does not mean that a person's heart is changed. I believe only Christ can change someone from the inside out. But in terms of how the society functions and how we interact with one another, I do think that there is a case to be made that some positive legislation can bring about positive changes, which of course sounds like a lot of what you are driving at anyways with some of the statements you made about legislating. But I'm just curious if you guys have any thoughts on that specifically, about the idea of legislation encouraging good behavior, which can lead to societal changes.
Yeah, that's a very slippery slope, man. The reason being is because if if you're allowing legislators and things like that, no matter how well intentioned they are, to say, visa law, like this is considered good behavior, what ends up happening is a lot of people tend to conform to that idea of good behavior, and so it's somebody else's idea of good behavior that you're adhering to, and the people whose version of good behavior you're adhering to have control over, at least on a local level, they have, the law enforcement behind them and things like that. So these things can almost inevitably lead to violence and things like that. So I would rather not. I mean, I would be willing to submit to like an extreme cases there, but I would think that the way to fix a lot of these problems is kind of like what you and Representative Williams were talking about there is the church stepping up and, helping people find where the lines are. I think that's why free speech and things like that are so important, is you need to have people out there with crazy ideas, the bohemians like me singing our weird songs and things like that, so that people can come out alongside them and say, hey, that's, maybe not the best way of looking at things, or this is not a healthy way of carrying out, and I think that would be a good way to solve, even just like Representative Williams was talking about with the drag queen. They're saying, hey, like, I'm not okay with this at all, and that's somebody who does drag, you know what I mean? So just even communities like that policing themselves, I think, would be way more healthier than just outsourcing that problem to people who don't always have an intimate understanding of people's lives, and nobody knows your life better than you. So to outsource that, I think, is a grave danger, and should be, definitely considered very carefully before getting legislation involved. I think the history speaks for itself of once you allow or get too loose with people saying this is good behavior, this is bad behavior, the results, no matter how well intentioned they are, end up being catastrophic.
Yeah, and I think you're right that it can be a slippery slope in terms of, I think a heavy-handed government is definitely a recipe for disaster. But at the same time, I do feel like we can look to examples of when our society was more moral, for example. And I think that you could say that a lot of legislation or removal of certain legislation has aided in some of the societal decay. Now, I'm not saying that legislation is our only answer. I would personally advocate that it be twofold, that we have good legislation with good legislators writing the correct amount of laws. I think that too many laws, I think that causes too many people to become burdened down. But I think I would say that it's twofold, of good legislators making good laws, as well as a very prominent church within the culture that can be the advisor to the king that the church is supposed to play.
I'd like to quickly add an addendum to what you're saying, Connor, about a time of a more, like I said, moral society. I might argue that we are in the most moral society we've ever seen. The difficulty is that it's all relative morality, that our morality is not based in a unified source. So the individuals that believe that children should be subject to procedures to affect their gender identity, they do so from a moral bearance that is skewed by their own understanding of those morals. So Ultimately, like we often say, this all kind of revolves around the kingdom and understanding where our morality comes from and how we can point people to the love of Christ as the master and perfecter of that morality.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I think the interesting part is that when I say you can't legislate morality, it's a lot like if you look at the reason why we have the Ten Commandments. We have the Ten Commandments. God gave us the Ten Commandments because it showed us our need of Him. Laws are similar to that. They can point you in the right direction in which you can go, but there has to be this transaction with morality or through a heart condition change that really says, well, I know that's not pleasing to God, or I know I have to have a relationship with God, but this is what's showing me that I am in need of Him, because we live in a society where we have no need of Him. I mean, and so that's what I mean by legislating morality. What I'm saying is these are opportunities that we can use to be a reflection to other people so that they can reflect internally as to who they are as an individual and who we are as a people. And so when I mean you can't legislate, that I can make a law, I can make laws all day long, but I can't change hearts. I can make a law that says if you take your kid to a drag queen show, it's a Class C felony, punishable for 1129, right? But if you think that's okay, and you think you're not going to get caught, you're not changing your morality. You're just breaking the law. You see what I'm saying? And so laws can be used, and we have the example of scriptures of laws were used to show men their own hearts, right? And we even in the worst case of Sodom, I was reading the other day, in the worst case of Sodom, Lot was so confused by the events of the day that he's offering things that seem unconscionable to us as to him, but it was natural to him at the time. His morality was skewed based upon the day, and that's the day we live in. We live in a day where we look weird because we don't conform to what the image of what the world has for us today. And so until we continue to be salt and light in our communities, and we stop being the tribe that we're called to, or the the group that we feel most comfortable with, and start actually being the big C church, it's really not going to effectuate anything. So I get your point as it relates to that, but I think laws can be used as a laser pointer. Go that way. And not that you'll change the hearts of men, but you definitely can change their minds as it leads to their hearts, hopefully.
Yeah, and I think where my desire to see just laws come about is obviously the desire that everyone has, but which is to I shouldn't say everyone, but I would say most people set out with good intentions when they talk about legislation. But from my standpoint, I think I'm more looking at society as a whole when I'm making that argument. In terms of I don't want my children to grow up in a world where all age drag shows is a normal thing. So for me, that's where I would want both a church that can be pointing towards righteousness, while at the same time laws that, like you said, Representative Williams, that can be guidelines that kind of can point us in the right direction. So that's probably the more succinct idea of what I'm driving at with that. But I am curious, as a representative, what do you think is what have you witnessed being the most effective way that legislation and politics in general can be used to bring about positive social change? Because obviously we could talk negatives of government all day long, but what kind of positive uses have you seen in your time serving, as well as what kind of advice would you give individuals who want to maybe be more involved in a positive way, but are struggling to find, where they fit into the bigger picture of the political, cultural scene?
Well, of course, I've never shared this with you guys before, but politics is a lot. Former Governor Haslam and I used to joke about this a lot. He was a mayor. He was a mayor of Knoxville before he was governor, and I was a city councilman before I was the state representative. And this role of elected office is a lot like being we would say it was a lot like being a pastor, except everyone's expectations of you are really low. They expect you to live this immoral life just because you're a politician. But we feel, those of us that feel called to do this, or feel like this is what the Lord would have us to do, it's much, Michael, like being a seminary student. You feel called or drawn to this, a people, and you steward them in the same way, and it's the same thing. And there's a pastoral care component of it, where you really want to go out and you want to help people, and you can do that through the legal means or the legal process. And so my wife and I got involved with this 22 years ago. We stood on the Supreme Court steps and said, Lord, we really feel like that we're asking you this after an extended focus time. And we said, Lord, please overturn Roe v. Wade in our lifetime, 22 years ago. And we believed then that it would happen, but we had no idea it would happen. And so that's what people like me and so many others are out there to do. They're called to this. And so a lot of that sometimes means passing bills that get you in the court of law, so you can end up in an appellate court, so you can end up in a Supreme Court. And as difficult as it is to say, if we hadn't passed laws that they said were unconstitutional, you wouldn't see Roe v. Wade overturned today. And so a lot of that is being the tip of the spear and pushing the envelope as it relates to being the change in your communities. And I tell people all the time, I never ran for political office, but I've never disobeyed for very long anyways. Something the Lord's called me to do. And this is one of those things, and we're going to do it as long as it's great part about elections. When you get, you run every 2 years, you get beat pretty quick. And so his favor can change and move to someone else. But I think it's really important for people to do that. And there's been this role or this position has really been frowned on for decades, and the church has really been co-conspirators in castigating elected officials as if they were branded with a scarlet letter, and it's wrong. Really, it is. And we wouldn't have this grand experiment that we have today if people didn't step forward and serve their communities and take their morality with them to the legal means by which we make laws in our Constitution.
Yeah, that's good. Michael, I know that you can speak a lot to some of the church attitude. Do you feel like you notice, we've discussed this a little bit previously, but do you feel like you've noticed a hostility towards political figures within the church? And if so, what do you think is the proper way of addressing it as congregational members?
There's a great diversity of thought within the church, of course, and largely it can be characterized within the scope of dogmatism. And there's dogmatically conservative perspectives to a fault, where people will die on the hill of the conservative candidate without thinking through the legislation themselves. Really, and there's a wide scope of things, that doesn't mean that there aren't equally passionate Christian liberals as well. As far as the response to political candidacy within the church, I mean, jury's out. That there's there are church communities who widely accept and promote candidates. There are some that are hesitant to even speak of such topics from the pulpit, which I think there's a good conversation to be had about whether and when that is appropriate. Ultimately, as people of the church and people of the book, the conversation that we've had thus far concerning law and the conditions of the heart. It makes me think of the words of Christ, because if we're Christians, we should look first to Christ and not even the church. And what Christ says in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5, he says, I haven't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. So he's obviously pro-law. And then how many times do we see in the subsequent text when the religious leaders, the Pharisees, Sadducees, and scribes and rulers of the law are testing him and challenging Christ's own understanding and application of the law, so much so that when we get to chapter 9, Jesus says, in response to them scrutinizing him healing on the Sabbath, he says, go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And sacrifice, of course, in the context of the law that they're abiding by, is the letter of the law. But mercy is the heart of the Father. And that's how Christ can, going back in Scripture again, Christ can say, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second best commandment is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. These commandments sum the law and the prophets. So when we legislate a conduct or morality into writing, certainly that should be our goal and the focal point of our purposes, whether it be as voters who are congregants of the local church and of the Big C Church of Christ, like Representative Williams mentioned, or if we are the legislators and we are the representatives and elected officials, we should be of one accord to that end, so long as we bind ourselves first to the kingdom as our allegiance and next to the country, which we certainly have lots of room for patriotism within the Christian faith as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's good for the church to really speak to identity, because I think that's where a lot of the stuff with furries, comes about. Is I think people are seeking their identity and they want to be known, and the church can help them do that. We are running low on time, but Zach, with the rising spread of furry fandom, do we need to take 15 days to slow the spread?
Yeah, and there's still WMDs in Iraq, man. Yeah, so really don't have much to add to what you guys talked about before. The entire conversation I keep thinking about Nietzsche and his quote that God is dead and we killed him. And what he meant by that is that at the time, people had figured out a way to more or less carry on without the church. And so when I hear Representative Williams talk about, bringing the big C back in church, I think that's how we can kind of fix that problem is by, we talk about a lot in the church about, the death of Christ and the resurrection, but and how it's important to understand that he did die for us and for everybody, but also but sometimes gets left off of that conversation is he also lived for us as well. And so I think if we follow that example, and there's countless times throughout the scriptures there of Christ exercising compassion, and I think that really would be a good place to start, is having compassion for your legislators and the people in your community, having compassion for the furries, right, and having compassion for the drag queen that's reading at the library and things like that. I think that's how you can begin to kind of nudge people along and kind of help them find their identity in Christ.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, well, we are just about running out of time. So, Representative Williams, where can people keep up with you?
You can find me on social media pages, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Ryan Williams TN. You can Google search or DuckDuckGo search me with my name, Representative Ryan Williams. You have my legislative office here in Nashville, phone number here in Cookeville, as well as Nashville, email address. Love for you to reach out. Always encourage folks, come see me in the Capitol. Come up and participate in the process. Maybe sometime you three we can do this from up there sometime, at least those that are close by, we can do it up there. But appreciate the opportunity to sit down with you guys and talk about the Big C church and the direction we're going as a nation.
Absolutely. Michael, where can people find you?
These days, you can find me studying Greek in the library.
Excellent. Thank you for being here. And Zach, where can people find you?
Yes, you can find me on the Intercontinentals at Zach Kaval Music on the Instagram. There is a Facebook page, but it's all Instagram stuff anyway. So just follow me on Instagram, YouTube. There's going to be a lot more fun stuff happening on YouTube. Of course, on Spotify, listening to my new album, October the 14th. Until then, I just want to remind everybody out there that diplomacy is the art of saying nice doggy until you can find a rock.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening in. We have been the Forge and Anvil podcast. And as always, if you are wanting to support the show, go to forgeandanvil.locals.com. Again, that is forgeandanvil.locals.com. Thanks so much. Have a great night.